Welcome students to the online lecture on planning legislation and urban governance. In previous lectures we have discussed the law of nature, jurisprudence, how legislation is enacted by legislatures. We have also dealt with terms like legislation, ordinance, bill, act, regulations and bylaws. Thereafter we have discussed the legislations pertaining to urban governance as envisaged in the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment. Then a few legislations pertaining to urban planning acts such as the Town and Country Planning Act, Land Acquisition Act, Environment Protection Act 1986, National Environment Policy 2006. So in today's lecture we will discuss the Disaster Management Act 2005, which was enacted on 26 December 2005. So this particular act permits the states to have their own legislation on disaster management. Here are the salient features of this act. The Act comprises 79 sections and 11 chapters. It defines the disaster and disaster management in its new concept. The new concept, which deals with the disaster management cycle, which is divided into pre and post disaster phases, which is further classified into mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery. It provides for setting up of institutions for monitoring and implementation of disaster management plans. It also ensures the measures that are to be taken by various wings of the government for prevention and mitigation of disasters. The Act directs the state governments to amend their relief codes to make them more comprehensive. The Act provides for a National Disaster Management Authority, that is the NDMA. Thereafter, the state government shall create state disaster management authorities and district disaster management authorities. There shall be a disaster response fund and disaster mitigation fund at all the three levels of governance, that is the national, state, and the district levels. So, as we can see from the salient features, that this act is a comprehensive one. It starts with defining the disaster management cycle. It provides for institutional mechanism to be set up, and it ensures that various wings of the government have their responsibilities fixed. The Act provides for a national level authority, that is the NDMA, and it creates the three-tier system for implementation of your disaster management plans. That is the state governments that will create state disaster management authorities and district disaster management authorities, and later on we'll see that we have these local disaster management authorities also at the third tier of governance. And then lastly, it deals with the financial aspects that are related to the mitigation and management of disasters. So here we see the chapterization of this act. We have these 11 chapters which are divided into these 79 sections, and further we have these particulars that are dealt in these sections. So at the first tier we have this National Disaster Management Authority, or the NDMA. The National Disaster Management Authority is headed by Prime Minister with 9 more members for laying down the policies and plans and guidelines for disaster management. The authority will be assisted by National Executive Committee, that is the NEC, which comprises of the secretaries to the central government, and the function of this national authority is to recommend guidelines for the minimum standards of relief. So basically, subject to the provisions of this act, the NDMA shall have the responsibilities for laying down policies, plans, and guidelines for disaster management. So basically, you have these guidelines that are to be formulated by NDMA, which will lay down policies on disaster management, which will approve national plan for disaster management, or the approval of plans that are prepared by ministries or departments of government of India in accordance to the national disaster management plan, or laying down guidelines to be followed by the state disaster management authority while drawing up the state plan, laying down guidelines that are to be followed by various departments or ministries of government of India, or coordinating and the enforcement and implementation of policy and plan for disaster management, then recommended provisions of fund for the purpose of mitigation, or awareness programs. So they recommend the provision for the fund generation for these programs. Then providing such support to other countries that are affected by major disasters as may be deemed suitable by the center government. Then to take other measures that deals with prevention of disaster or mitigation or preparedness, then capacity building, training personals for disaster management. And it also lays down broad policies and guidelines for functioning of the National Institute of Disaster Management. So these are the basic functions of NDMA. So next comes the State Disaster Management Authority, or the SDMA. The State Disaster Management Authority will be chaired by the Chief Minister. He may elect one of the members of the authority as the Vice Chairman of the State Authority. The State Authority may constitute an advisory committee of experts in the field of disaster management. Then the authority will also be responsible for laying down policies, plans for disaster management at the state level. And the state authority will also recommend the guidelines for providing the minimum standards of relief in an event of a disaster. The state authority will also be assisted by the state executive committee, which will comprise of secretaries to the state government. So next down the hierarchy is the District Disaster Management Authority, or the DDMA. So it will be established by the state government for each of the district, and the chairperson for this DDMA will be the collector or district magistrate or deputy commissioner of the district. The elected representatives of the area will be automatically act as the ex officio co-chairperson of the authority. The district authority shall be acting as the district planning and coordinating body for disaster management of that particular district. Then further down the hierarchy, we have these local authorities that work at the grassroots level by training its officers and employees, and it also maintains the resources that are to be made readily available in an event of a disaster. So it shall also ensure that all the construction projects that are being carried out under its jurisdiction, they all conform to the standards and specifications as laid down. It shall also carry out the relief, rehabilitation, and reconstruction activities in the areas that are affected within its jurisdiction. So basically, it is the most grassroots level authority that will directly deal with the victims of the disaster. Then, under the section 44 and 45 of this act, there's a provision for constituting the National Disaster Response Force, or the NDRF, which is a specialized response force. And in case of an disaster that is life threatening, like flood, forest fire, earthquake, so this particular response force is equipped to provide specialist response in case of these threatening disasters. And it is headed by the Director General, which is appointed by the center government. Under the Disaster Management Act, we have these provisions for creating various funds also. For example, at the national level, we have this National Disaster Response Fund by center government, which comes through grants provided by persons or various institutions. And National Disaster Mitigation Fund for mitigation projects that deals with the mitigation phase of disaster management cycle, that is the pre-disaster phase. At the state government also, at the state government level also, we have to establish disaster response fund and disaster mitigation fund, even at the state level and at the district level. Then every ministry or department also makes provision to fund its activities that are related to the disaster management plan. Sure. Then we have some penal provisions also under this act from section 51 to section 60. Like section 51 deals with punishment for obstruction or non-compliance of the directions given by center or state government, or by the National Executive Council, State Executive Council, or DDMA. So there is a provision for up to 1 year of imprisonment or fine or both. And if such obstruction results in loss of lives or it creates imminent danger thereof, the imprisonment can be extended to 2 years. Punishment for false claim for obtaining relief assistance. So there may be a few people who make a false claim for just obtaining relief assistance. So under section 52 there is a provision for 2-year imprisonment with fine. Similarly, section 53 deals with punishment for misappropriation of money or materials. So in case any person that is entrusted with money or material related to disaster management, and if he misuses that money or material, then there's a provision for 2 years of imprisonment and fine. Next is section 54, punishment for false warning. So anybody obviously related with disaster management, anybody who makes a false warning, there's a provision for 1 year imprisonment or fine. Next is section 55, in which any government department or officers of the concerned department, if they are making any kind of offense, then the head of the department will be held guilty unless he proves otherwise, and any other officer who is found guilty will be liable to the for proceedings against him, or the legal proceedings against him will be pursued. Next is section 56, which deals with refusal to perform any duty by any government officer. So in case any government officer refuses to perform his duty that is conferred upon him by the government, or under his ability or under his jurisdiction, so there is a provision for 1 year imprisonment or fine. Next is section 57, under which penalty for contravention of any order of requisitioning. So this means that in case any person or authority is supposed to provide for, supply, or is demanded of any particular material for disaster management or anything related to it, and if he refuses to do so, then there is a provision of 1 year imprisonment or fine, or maybe both. Then there are a few other provisions also under this act, like section 42 of the act calls for establishing a National Institute of Disaster Management, or NIDM. Then section 46 to section 50 mandates creation of funds for disaster mitigation at various levels. Then the act provides for civil and criminal liabilities or the penal provisions also, like we have seen previously. Then as per National Disaster Management Act 2005, we have some other provisions also, like section 22, which promotes community training, that is part of capacity building. Section 30, which emphasizes on training. Section 32, that involvement of communities in preparation and implementation of local plans. So this deals with basically the community participation aspect of disaster management. As per National Policy on Disaster Management 2009, we have segment 3, disaster prevention, mitigation and preparedness. Then segment 4, community as first responders, because at community level we have the locals who are the victims and they are the first ones to respond in case of a disaster. Then segment 10 again deals with capacity building or training of communities at large. Here we have nodal agencies for disaster management. Like for floods, the responsibility lies with Ministry of Water Resources or Central Water Commission. Similarly, for cyclones, Indian Meteorological Department. For earthquakes also, Indian Meteorological Department, although it can't provide for the accurate prediction for earthquakes, but yeah, it can provide for vital statistics related to earthquakes. Similarly, for epidemics, we have Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Similarly, for avian flu, for chemical disasters, we have Ministry of Environment and Forests. For industrial disasters, Ministry of Labor. For railway accidents, Ministry of Railway. For air accidents, Ministry of Civil Aviation. For fire related accidents, Ministry of Home Affairs. For nuclear incidents, Department of Atomic Energy. And finally, for mine disasters, Department of Mines. Then finally, we have this National Disaster Management Structure, so that we can understand the provisions of this act with relation to the various agencies and bodies involved in disaster management. So we have Government of India at the top, under which we have the National Disaster Management Authority. below which we have National Institute of Disaster Management, then National Disaster Response Force, National Disaster Mitigation Resource Center. So we have different wings that deal with various phases of the disaster management cycle. So on the left wing we have Planning Commission, which is now known as the Niti Aayog, then Ministry of Home Affairs, other ministries and departments of the government, and armed forces, which is again a very vital force that is used for providing immediate relief. Then cabinet on the right wing we have Cabinet Committee on Security, that is the CCS. Then Cabinet Committee on Management of Natural Calamities. Then High Level Committee and National Crisis Management Committee. Then further down we have the state or the union territories governments that again deal with State Disaster Management Authority, Department of Home Affairs, ministries of and departments of the government, then Home Guard, Civil Defense, Police, Fire Services. All these are related to providing immediate relief to the disaster victims. Then percolating further down to the districts, we have the DDMAs, then the departments of the district governance like Home Guards, Civil or Defense, Police and Fire Services, and local bodies and authorities further down that deal with the local community level planning. And community itself is very important because the participation of community is very important, as the communities are the first responders to these disasters. So students, now I hope that you have a clear picture of all the provisions that are made under this act, the Disaster Management Act 2005. So in our next lecture, we'll deal with various land acquisition models. Previously, we have dealt with the Land Acquisition Act. Now we'll deal with other models that are related to land acquisition, such as accommodation reservation, land pooling, and transferable development rights. So till then, take care and stay safe. Thank you.